have a hard conversation without breaking down and having a complete meltdown, without shutting down and getting overwhelmed and not being able to say exactly what you really were trying to say. So I'm going to answer a few questions and chat with you about this topic. So the first question is, why do hard conversations feel so intense in our bodies, even when we know the other person isn't actually unsafe? This is such a familiar experience for me. I grew up pretty shy and reserved. And so conversations that really, you might have said, shouldn't have been such a big deal, felt really, really terrifying for me. And I always remember a therapist of mine once said, Landrie, it's not a conflict, it's a conversation. And that kind of helped me switch into expecting conflict based on my previous experiences to, hey, this is a collaborative experience. Perhaps the other person is feeling nervous about it too, and we can actually be a team to tackle the conversation together. And that was a helpful reframe for me. So the question of why it feels so intense in our bodies, that is because that is our nervous system. When our nervous system picks up threat, whether it's an actual threat or a perceived threat, emphasis on perceived, our nervous system makes a decision for us before it ever gets into our sort of cognitive parts of our brain. So we're not consciously making a decision. That's why when somebody says calm down, it's not really always that helpful, because it can be helpful, but it's not always so helpful, because the part of our brain that sends us into fight or flight or freeze or fawn is not a cognitive part. So tackling it with logic isn't always particularly helpful. So that's part of the reason it feels so intense in our bodies, is we may have moved from a grounded ventral vagal nervous system circuitry into fight, flight, freeze. And so it can feel really intense. Another reason it feels intense is because our brain is basing current responses off of past experiences. So if you've had a bad experience in the past with confrontation, or if you never learned in your family how to bring up concerns and have them valued and listened to, then your brain's going to go off of those previous experiences and use that as a template and a framework to deal with the tough conversation that you're in right now. So a lot of really good reasons why you might be feeling overwhelmed, shut down, even if the person in front of you is a safe person and you know that cognitively. All right, so the next question is, what are some of the most common nervous system reactions you see during conflict, like shutting down, over-explaining, or snapping? Yeah, so some of the common ones, some of there's some common ones that I think women tend towards and others that men tend towards. But really it can be across the board the same a lot of the time. A big one is shutting down. And there's a word that is used to describe shutting down. It's called stonewalling. And so that's a really common response during conflict, but that's actually not what comes first. That's actually typically what comes last. And research shows us it takes about 20 minutes at least to get out of that stonewalling shutdown place after we've become what's called flooded. So flooded would actually be something that happens before the shutdown. It's when we become overwhelmed. Our psyche, you could say, becomes overwhelmed and isn't able to handle the perceived threat in front of us. And so it kind of makes that decision for us to shut down. But certainly things that happen when we start to get dysregulated, we might stutter, get flushed. You might notice warmth in your face, or your hands get cold or hot. They might get sweaty. Your heart rate and breathing might increase. These are all signs that you're moving into fight or flight. And I think it's helpful to know what you particularly tend to do. So I know I kind of get tunnel vision, and my face gets hot. That's when I know I'm getting overwhelmed and my body is perceiving threat, and I'm about to go into fight, which means like arguing, snapping, critical words, that kind of thing. Or I might be about to shut down, and that can take me a little while to get out of, because that's how pretty much all of our nervous systems work. So if that sounds familiar, that's probably what's happening for you too. And it can be helpful to kind of ground yourself before you get into that, because once the train is off to the races, mixed metaphor there, it can be hard to slow it down. Third question is, how can someone prepare for a hard conversation when they already feel overwhelmed or emotionally flooded? If you are already emotionally flooded, I would postpone for a short period of time and actively work to ground yourself. I wouldn't postpone it forever or a long period of time, but if you can do a quick grounding and then get to the conversation so that you are not sort of living in the dread of it, then that can be helpful. Another way to prepare is to imagine the best case scenario, because, well, actually, I like to do both. I like to help clients imagine the best case scenario because our brains are designed to pay more attention to the negative. That's how we survive. We're really good at paying attention to what bad things could happen, but it does it disproportionately. So we are not going to remember a beautiful sunset as much as we are going to remember when somebody cut us off in traffic, for example. Our brain is designed to really pay attention to the negative. So I would envision the conversation going really, really well. And that is hard to do because our brains are so good at thinking about negative things, and for good reason. That's a good thing. And then I would also think about, what's the worst case scenario? Okay, maybe the worst case scenario is I shut down and I feel bad about myself for the rest of the day. Okay, now that I can think of the worst case scenario, I can plan for that and say, okay, well, if that happens, I'm going to take a bath tonight. I'm going to call my best friend. I'm going to have a good cry. You know, you can kind of prepare for the worst case scenario. What's the best case scenario? And really think about the best case scenario and let that hit in your nervous system so your nervous system can feel the safety of that. Imagination is really is a great tool. All right, last question. After a difficult but productive conversation, why do people often feel so exhausted, and what helps with recovery? This is great. So your emotions, your mental brain power can use up your glucose stores. You do not need to be using your physical body to burn calories. It is emotional work, mental work. You're burning calories. Brain power takes fuel, and it can be really intense, especially if you are, again, nervous system is in fight or flight. Your body is geared up to keep you alive at all cost. And that takes enormous amount of energy. And so it's very normal to feel depleted or tired afterwards. A lot of times people feel really tired after a therapy session for the same reason. Not for the fight or flight reason, but for the energy it takes to be emotionally, mentally present to that degree. So if you want to read more, head over to the blog, etheridgecounseling.com, and you can read my most recent article and grab some tips from there if you've got some difficult conversations coming up.